Thank you for joining us once again here at the Spring Hill Church of Christ, meeting at 405 Butler Street, Spring Hill, Louisiana. I'm Mike Hughes, the host of this Bible study from the first book of Samuel, chapter 21 through 25. I invite you to turn there as we begin this study. We always start off our class with this chart. This chart is from the United Kingdom all the way through the return of the Southern Kingdom from Babylonian captivity. The United Kingdom goes from 1 Samuel chapter 8 all the way through 1 Kings chapter 11. The divided kingdom then lasts from 1 Kings chapter 12 up until 2 Kings chapter 17. 2 Kings chapter 17, we have Judah alone from 2 Kings chapter 17 through chapter 25. 2 Kings 17 through 2 Kings chapter 25, what we have there. And then we continue on captivity. I want you to understand captivity going on there until Ezra and Nehemiah, and we see the captivity goes on. And so there it is. We've been having our brethren try to memorize this chart, try to be able to fill this chart in. You have Saul, David, and Solomon. We're going from Saul to David in this study, and each of them reigned 40 years. Each had a 40-year reign. And so people here can pretty well explain this chart, what happened to cause the divided kingdom, how Assyria went into captivity, 721 BC, how Babylon went in, or how the southern kingdom went into Babylonian captivity in 3 deportations, and then we have 3 returns from captivity talked about there. And so that's a very important chart, a chart you need to understand in understanding Old Testament history. So we're still in the United Kingdom, particularly 1 Samuel chapter 21 through chapter 25. Saul is king. God has said, I have given it to a man that is better than you. And here is a look at 1 Samuel at a glance, and particularly we are in this area, the third transition of leadership from Saul to David. Again, the United Kingdom. There we have Saul from 1050 to 1010 BC. We have David going from 1010 BC to 970. Solomon goes from 970 to roughly 930 BC. And of course, Rehoboam and Jeroboam then have a divided kingdom when it comes to their reign. A timeline of the birth of Samuel, the birth of Saul, the birth of David. There we can see the correlation between them. We've already talked about Saul's decline, what led to his fall, what led to him no longer being king. There it is on the chart. A presumptuous sacrifice, a foolish curse, sparing the king of the Amalekites, Agag, and the flocks. The book of Samuel, 1st and 2nd, as drawn up by the Bible Projects, and a pretty good rendition, a visual rendition for those that like that kind of rendition. And we are here where Saul's haunts David, and where Saul's going to eventually die when we get to 1 Samuel, the last chapter of 1 Samuel. David has been anointed king, but Saul is functioning as king. When you ask who is the king, Saul is functioning as king, but obviously, it is obvious that David will eventually take over as running the kingship. Right now, David is in a very bad situation. He went back to Saul, and of course we see that Saul still has this evil spirit and wanted to kill him. David was stealing the hearts of the people, and Saul demoted him. David did turn, with David it turned bitter and ugly, Saul did. And David accepted it graciously. We see that. Seeing David as a man with great qualities, their hearts began to turn to David. Saul sees this as he determines to kill David and get rid of who he sees as the enemy. How does he propose to do this? He tries two methods. He sends him into battle against who? And he was successful at the battle. Against whom? What did he do? Tried to spare him. David ducked out of the way of Saul 3 times. David, getting to the point he sees his life is in jeopardy, he runs, so Saul is after David. He makes a covenant with Jonathan, and he says to him, if I have done anything against your family, you slay me. Said, we will be protective to one another all the days of our life. Saul, having mental issues, Jonathan will let David know if Saul changed his mind about David. So Saul had plans to kill David at the feast. And so we see he's mad at Jonathan over helping David. He tries to kill Jonathan. And of course, we know the story of the arrows that we saw in our last study. Now, in this lesson, beginning in chapter 21, going through chapter 28, we are going to see the rise of David while he is in exile, how his popularity is going to increase as Saul's decreases. So this map will help us as we get involved in our study here. You'll notice we are looking at 1 Samuel. We saw chapter 19, Saul becoming angry. We're going to see Nob. We're going to see Keilah. And they're listed on this map, so that'll help when we come to it. And I'll pull this map up as we go in our study. So another difficult decision, another point of no return. David clearly felt that this time there was no going back. Saul was not going to cope with him being part of the court, and given that his military successes goaded Saul beyond bearing, he could not even be part of the army. And it is to David's credit that in spite of his own popularity and his own favoritism among the people and his abilities, the option of staging a coup or setting up in opposition to Saul never came to question. As far as David was concerned, Saul had been anointed and appointed by God, and in spite of his faults would remain king until God himself removed him from office. 1 Samuel 24, 5 through 10 will show this, and chapter 26, 9 through 14. David had entered Saul's service, and in spite of Saul's unjust suspicions of him, he took that position very seriously. Whether David or indeed anyone other than Samuel had been told of Saul's rejection by God is never discussed. There are instances in Scripture when those understood to be called by God are removed from office because they have failed to exercise their calling properly. David's own grandson, Rehoboam, came into such a category. But this is not one of those instances. From David's perspective, there was no other choice than to flee into the country. To do otherwise would put others in danger or undermine Saul's position, and David had no desire to do either of these things. Now David comes to Nob, and Abimelech the priest comes to him. And it points that out to us here in chapter 21, beginning in verse 1. Chapter 21, beginning in verse 1. David came to Nob, and Abimelech the priest, and Abimelech came to David to meet David, trembling, and said to him, "Why are you alone, and no one with you?" David said to Abimelech the priest, "The king has charged me with a matter and said, 'Let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you, and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place.'" Now then, he says, "Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread of whatever is here." And the priest said, "I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread," that is showbread. "If the young men have kept themselves from women," and David answered the priest, "Truly women have been kept from us, as always when I go on an expedition. The vessels of the young men are holy, even when it is an ordinary journey. How much more today will their vessels be holy?" So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread there but the bread of the presence, that is the showbread, which is removed from before the Lord to be replaced by not bread on the day it is taken away. So they're going to put a new bread, fresh bread out there. "A certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg, the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen." And then David said to Abimelech, "Then have you not here a spear or a sword at hand? For I have brought neither my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste." And the priest said, "The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you struck down in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If you will take it, take it, for there is none but that here." And David said, "There is none like that. Give it to me." So now we're going to see deceit, a necessary tool in the armor of the exile. So no problem. Doeg, Saul's servant, the reference to Doeg being detained before the Lord is obscure. He will report this incident to Saul in an attempt to get himself back in favor with Saul. And so in verse 8, David says to Abimelech, this is where we saw a few minutes ago that he asked him about, and of course is given the sword of Saul here in this passage of Scripture. And then notice, if you will, verse 10. David rose and fled that day from Saul and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Now, if you look at this map, you'll notice that we have Gath. There it is in the green, as you saw the other, it's being chroma keyed out. Let me go back to the green, and you'll see in that green section there, in Philistia, what is listed as Philistia, there is where Gath is located. And so the servant of Achish said to him, "Is not this David the king of the land? Did they not sing to one another of him in dances? Saul has struck down his 1,000 and David his 10,000s." And David took these words to heart and was much afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And so he changed his behavior before them and pretended to be insane in their hands, and made marks on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle run down his beard. Then Achish said to his servant, "Behold, you see the man is mad. Why then have you brought him to me? Do I lack madmen, that you have brought this fellow to behave as a madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house?" So even the discontented can make good soldiers. David departed from there, and he escapes to the cave of Adullam. Now, notice this in verse 1. "And when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, gathered to David, and he became commander over him, and there were with him about 400 men. David has mustered for himself 400 men. David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and my mother stay with you till I know what God will do with me. And he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed, went into the forest of Hereth. And when Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, now Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tarmakish tree in Ramah with a spear in his hand, and all his servants standing about him. Now that's what we notice. So there's what we just read. Saul is sitting in Gibeah under this tree. Saul said to his servants, who stood about him? Hear now, people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day. Now that's what Saul thought. Saul thought David was going to kill him. So Doeg, the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul, said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king summoned Ahimelech the priest, and the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. And Saul said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered him, Here I am, my lord. Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you and the sons of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as at this date? Now that's what Saul thought of how David thought David was going to kill him. Ahimelech answered the king, and he says to the king, And who among all your servants is so faithful as David? Who is the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little. And the king said, You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. And the king said to the guard who stood about him, Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. They wasn't going to strike the holy ones. So, chapter 23 now, we're going to look to the Philistines as they're fighting against Keilah, and they're robbing the threshing floors. And David's going to inquire the Lord, saying, Shall I go attack these Philistines? Here it is. Now, here again is the region that we're talking about, the Philistia region. And so David told David, Behold, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah and are robbing the threshing floors. That's the map that we just saw to show us where this is all located. David inquired of the Lord, shall I go attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to him, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said, behold, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more then if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? David inquired of the Lord again, and the Lord answered him, arise and go to Keilah, for I will give the Philistines into your hand. David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines and brought away their livestock and struck them with a great blow. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. And Abithar, the son of Ahimelech, had fled to David to Keilah. He had come down with an ephah in his hand. So here we have these locations. We see Keilah is on this map. We see Gath is on this map. All these areas that we speak of. There's Ramah and these different places. Now, if we really want to see Keilah, here's Keilah, right there on the inside of this map of the kingdom of Saul, not very far from Gath. There's Adullam, where the cave of Adullam is that David fled to. There it is on this map. So now we're going to learn loyalty and betrayal. So now it was told Saul that David had come to Keilah, and Saul said, God has given him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. Saul summoned all the people to war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. David knew that Saul was plotting harm against him, and he said to Abithar the priest, bring the ephod here. And then David said, O Lord, the God of Israel, your servant has surely heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city on my account. Will the men of Keilah surrender me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord, the God of Israel, please tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will come down. Then David said, will the men of Keilah surrender me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, they will surrender you. Then David and his men, who were about 600, arose and departed from Keilah, and they went wherever they could go. And so when Saul was told that David had escaped from Keilah, he gave up the expedition. And David remembered in the strongholds in the wilderness, in the hill country of the wilderness of Ziph, and Saul sought him every day, but God did not give him into his hand. So Saul, who might have been, let's look at the Saul who might have been. David's next haven, next place to be, was in the cave of En-Gedi, down by the Dead Sea. We'll see that in a minute, where water and food was available, as well as a good hiding place. Notice, if you will, in verse 23, he said, see therefore, and take note of all the lurking places where he hides. Come back to me with sure information. That's what Saul wanted about David. He said, then I will go with you, and if he is in the land, I will search him out among all the thousands of Judah. And they arose and went to Ziph ahead of Saul. And now David and his men were in the wilderness of Mon, in the Arba, to the south of Jeshimon. Now, here is what will tell us where these areas are. If you'll look over close to the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea, you'll see Mashon there. David and his men went to seek him, and David was told, so he went down to the rock and lived in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard it, he pursued after David in the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, David and his men on the other side of the mountain, and David was hurrying to get away from Saul. As Saul and his men were closing in on David and his men to capture them, a messenger came to Saul, saying, "Hurry and come, for the Philistines have made a raid against the land." So Saul returned from pursuing after David and went against the Philistines. Therefore the place was called the Rock of Escape. So here's that area. There is Maon, and there's Ziph, and there's Carmel we'll be hearing about here in a few minutes. David went up from there, lived in the stronghold of En-Gedi. And so when the game goes on for a long time, it is easy to forget the rules. We're going to see that in the remainder of chapter 23 into chapter 24. Here we go. David went up, we notice, from there and lived in the strongholds of En-Gedi. And when Saul returned from following the Philistines, he was told, "Behold, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi." And then Saul took 3,000 chosen men out of all Israel and went to seek David and his men in front of the Wild Goats Rocks. That's a region. And he came to the sheepfolds by the way, where there was a cave. Saul went in to relieve himself, and now David and his men were sitting in the innermost parts of the cave. Saul just barely goes in. And the men of David said to him, "Here is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." David rose and stealthily. Then David arose and stealthily cut off a corner of Saul's robe. And afterwards David's heart struck him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe. He said to the men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my Lord, the Lord's anointed, to put out my hand against him, seeing he is the Lord's anointed." He's still king. So David pursued his men with these words and did not prevent them to attack Saul. And Saul rose up, left the cave, and went on his way. Afterward, David also arose, went out of the cave, and called after Saul, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David bowed with his face to the earth and paid homage. And David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, Behold, David seeks you harm? Behold, this day your eyes have seen how the Lord gave you today into my hand in the cave, and the same told me to kill you. And some told me to kill you. But I spared you. I said, I will not put out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." In verse 11, he said, "See, my father," he said, "see the corner of your robe in my hand, for by the fact that I cut off the corner of your robe and did not kill you, you may know and see that there is no wrong or treason in my hands. I have not sinned against you, though you hunt my life to take it. May the Lord judge between me and you. May the Lord avenge me against you, but my hand shall not be against you." As the proverb of the ancient says, "Out of the wicked comes wickedness, but my hand shall not be against you." After whom has the king of Israel come out? After whom do you pursue? After a dead dog? After a flea? May the Lord therefore be judge and give sentence between me and you, and see to it, and plead my cause, and deliver me from your hand. As soon as David had finished speaking these words, Saul said, "Is this your voice, my son David?" Saul lifted up his voice and wept. He said to David, "You are more righteous than I, for you have repaid me good, whereas I repaid you evil. You have declared this day how you have dealt with me, in that you did not kill me when the Lord put me into your hands. For if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safe? So may the Lord reward you with good for what you have done to me this day. Now behold, I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established by your hand. He says, swear to me, therefore, by the Lord, that you will not cut off my offspring after me, and that you will not destroy my name out of my father's house. And David swore this to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Chapter 25, beginning verse 1. Now Samuel died, and all of Israel assembled and mourned for him. And they buried him in his house at Ramah. And so now we're going to get the story in the remainder of this chapter of David and Abigail. A very interesting story, a very moving story. Saul's reconciliation with David was short-lived. And when we return, and his anger and his wanting to kill David will return in chapter 26 to his ongoing mission of seek and destroy. However, once Saul had openly acknowledged David's claim, any doubt about the final outcome has been removed. So now David is on the run. Saul is shown the kind of character he is, unstable in all his ways. Says do one thing and turn around and does another. And then, of course, we have Samuel dies. Samuel and Saul have no relationship at all at this time. We find they have had no relationship. The Spirit of God has left Saul. And so Samuel, when he dies, the Israelites gather together. They lament for him, bury him at his home in Ramah. David arose, went down to the wilderness of Paran. David is on the run. The remainder of this chapter is an interesting story. And so we're going to see this. The story is showing Saul's actions and activities could be condemned as completely foolish without making any explicit references any further to that. And so no comments about Saul. And we learn, beginning in verse 2, here's what we learn. David rose, went down to the wilderness of Paran. And so on this map, as you look at this map, we'll see right above the Gulf of Arba, we see the wilderness of Paran. See the wilderness of Zin right up there on the far right, so that gives you an idea of where we're talking about geographically. There was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep at Carmel. So now if you'll look at this map, you'll see Maon, you see Carmel right there in Judah, above Simeon there, and to the right, there's the Dead Sea on the far right. There's where we're talking about, right in that area. That'll help you see that a whole lot better. The name of the man was Nabal, and his wife, Abigail. We're introduced to Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a Calebite. He was from Caleb. Now, everyone has the right to expect hospitality. David does an unusual thing. When David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing sheep, so what's he do? Here it is. David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. And thus you shall greet him, peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. And so again, here is our area, Carmel, Maon. So they arise, go from the wilderness up to Carmel to Nabal. He said, ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at hand to your servants and to your son David. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they wait. They wait for an answer. And Nabal answered David's servant, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who have come from I don't know where? So David's young men turned away, came back, and told him all of this. And David said to his men, every man strap on his sword. Every man of them strapped on his sword, and David also strapped on his sword. And about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. And so now good and bad employers are known by their employees. That's what we're going to see here beginning in 14. Now one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, here's what he says, behold, David sent messengers out of the wilderness to greet our master, and he railed at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we did not miss anything when we were in the field as long as we went with them. They were a wall to us both by night and day, and all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now therefore know this and consider what you should do. For harm is determined against our master and against all the house, and he is such a worthless man that no one can speak to him. Then Abigail made haste, took 200 loaves and 2 skins of wine, and 5 sheep already prepared, and 5 sheaves of parched grain, and 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and laid them on donkeys. And she said to her young men, go on before me, behold, I come after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. And as she rode on the donkey, came down under the cover of the mountain, behold, David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. And David said, here's what David said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him, and he has returned me evil for good. And he says, in this next part, he says, God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belongs to him. And so the power of diplomacy, we're about to see the power of diplomacy from Nabal's wife, Abigail. And I think this is why later on Abigail is going to become the wife of David. David sees good qualities in this woman. And when Abigail saw David, she hurried and got down from the donkey and fell before David on her face and bowed to the ground. And she fell at his feet and said, on me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. And let not my Lord regard this worthless fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. That's what the word Nabal means. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now then, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, because the Lord has restrained you from bloodshed and from saving with your own hand. Now then, let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be as Nabal. And now, let this present that your servant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please, she says, forgive the trespass of your servant, for the Lord will certainly make my servant a sure house. My Lord, she says, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you as long as you live. And she goes on to say, if men rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living in the care of the Lord your God. And the lives of your enemies shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. And when the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for my Lord working salvation himself. And when the Lord has dealt with my Lord, then remember your servant. So now David says to Abigail, blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you this day to meet me. Blessed be your discretion, and blessed be you who have kept me this day from bloodshed and from working salvation with my own hand. For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning there had not been left to Nabal so much as one male. Then David received from her hand what she had brought him. And he said to her, go up in peace to your house. See, I have obeyed your voice and have granted your petition. And Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. And she told him nothing at all until morning light. Give him time to get over the drunk. So now we're going to see greed and temper are going to bring their own reward. Nabal is going to get the reward from God of his deed. That's indeed what we're going to see as we look at this section of Scripture, chapter 37 through 44. Here it is. Verse 37. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him. And he became as a stone. And about 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, blessed be the Lord, who has avenged the insult I received at the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from wrongdoing. The Lord has returned the evil that Nabal has done on his own head. Then David sent and spoke to Abigail to take her as his wife. Now look at her demeanor here. When the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, David has sent us to you to take you to come to him as wife. And she rose, bowed her face to the ground, and said, behold, your handmaid is a servant to wash the feet of the servants, my Lord. That's what she felt like that was her only place. That was her only deserving. Abigail hurried, rose, she mounts a donkey, and her 5 young women attendants, those that attended her, she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. just content to wash his feet, the servants' feet. David also, we find, took other wives. Hinnom of Jezreel, and both of them became his wife. Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Peti, the son of Laish, who was in Gilom. So Michal, who had been David's wife, Saul, trying to get back at David, I guess, gave her away. So she was no longer his wife. Saul had gave her to someone else. So with that, that concludes our study for this week. Next lesson, we are going to study 1 Samuel chapter 26 through 28. So cheerio, mate. And with that, Bob's your uncle. If you found this video helpful and want to learn more, be sure you download the note card, if available, with this lesson. We also offer a free 4-lesson Bible correspondence course. For more information, scan the QR code to my left with your phone, and then go to the link that is provided for you. There you will find more video lessons that you can get and glean information from. We here at the Spring Hill Church of Christ want to help you grow in your knowledge and understanding of God's Word. Remember, we are in it for the likes and the subs, so be sure that you subscribe. With that, thanks for watching or listening. In the meantime, in between time, we will see you next time. Cheerio, mate. Bob's your uncle.